If you've been following my channel for a while now, the name Lance McDonald might seem familiar to you. This is his YouTube channel. This is someone who is sort of a hacker extraordinaire who's been hacking PlayStation 4 titles and unveiling some interesting information. So back in December of 2019, you may recall that this individual released a video in which he managed to hack PT in such a way that you could walk through the street seen in the cutscene at the end of PT, which isn't pre-rendered, but actually rendered in-engine. And then beyond that, Lance released the second video on March 2020 that highlights some of the tricks and design elements that the developers used to achieve certain effects that kind of gave you a behind-the-scenes look at the title. And then he also was the individual who discovered, I don't know if you can even call this an Easter egg, but let's call it an Easter egg. And now the next game that he seems to be really focused on is Bloodborne. Now this is a title that's garnered nothing but overwhelming praise because of its tight combat, the atmosphere, the boss battles, you name it. It is often considered to be the best FromSoftware game. But the one issue with it is the frame rate. While it does run at 30 frames per second, unfortunately, due to what a lot of people are calling inconsistent frame pacing, the game just feels more stuttery than usual. It just makes the game feel like it's chugging along a little bit. And so Lance has been hard at work on a 60 frames per second patch for Bloodborne. And this is something that he began to explore on April 28th, 2020, when he published the following tweet that reads, "I patched Bloodborne to run at 60 frames per second. It works alright, about as good as the Dark Souls 3 PS4 Pro patch does, except for the fact that the game doesn't have proper timing and the entire game basically runs in fast forward. This is running on a base PS4. And then from there, Lance progressed and found ways to work around some of the issues with increasing the frame rate of Bloodborne. And so you have that progress report in this Twitter thread here. And then later that day on April 28th, 2020, Lance released a couple of clips showing Bloodborne in action properly running at 60 frames per second. So here we have one unlisted video uploaded on the same day, April 28th, and that looks something like this. And I know if you're not a Bloodborne fan or haven't played the game, this just looks like standard gameplay to you, but if you're a fan of Bloodborne, if you've played Bloodborne at all, you'll immediately notice the difference, just how much smoother everything looks. And I'm someone who played Sekiro on 60 frames per second before trying out Bloodborne, and just going from Sekiro at 60 FPS and going back to this stuttery 30 FPS on Bloodborne, it was just a hard transition, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't go back after the Sekiro experience, so I decided that I'd wait for Sony or FromSoftware to release a version of Bloodborne that runs at 60 FPS before really really delving into the game and finishing it. But I've played enough Bloodborne where I know what it looks and feels like, and just seeing this right here, it's a night and day difference. Just looking at it, I imagine that the feel of it is much different as well. And then beyond that, here's a second clip that Lance McDonald uploaded the next day on April 29th, 2020 that shows off a boss battle, and I'm not going to show all of it, but just looking at this clip, you get the idea. It's just a much smoother look. It didn't take long before a lot of people were drawn to Lance's work at enhancing Bloodborne's frame rate, because it really is the one Achilles heel to the game. So news outlet Kotaku actually interviewed Lance McDonald, where he shared some interesting details about how he basically reverse engineered Dark Souls 3's 60 FPS mode because the game runs on the same engine as Bloodborne. From there, Kotaku's article highlights the inconsistent frame pacing that Bloodborne faces that causes individual frames to be displayed for inconsistent lengths of time, making the game look stuttery. So the 60 frames per second patch pretty much addresses that entirely, though there are still some issues that Lance hasn't resolved. So for example, right here he talks about how he needs to fix the HUD so that it scales to 720p speed properly. He actually talked about this in this April 28th Twitter thread providing updates on this project. He said, I went one step further and patched Bloodborne to run at 720p instead of 1080p. It seems to hold 60 FPS really nice this way. Once again, this is all captured on a PS4 Pro running with boost mode enabled. Here's a little footage showing it off. And going back to Kotaku's article, as far as the HUD goes, he says that it's mostly fine, but enemy health bars don't line up properly, so there's some work to do on that front. And then finally, when asked whether this is something that will be released for other players, whether Lance intends to release this patch to the public, his response reads, it would be possible for me to release a patching utility, but it would only be usable by the tiny percentage of PS4 users who are able to run modified software on their systems and know how to apply their own custom modifications on top of that. It's a difficult thing to approach, so I'm not sure what will happen. So basically, to run this patch, you obviously have to hack or mod your PlayStation 4, which is not something that most people do. Now, that was all back in April of 2020. It's obviously been some time since then. Fast forward to this month, October of 2020, and you will find a video on Lance McDonald's channel published on October 10th titled Bloodborne 60 FPS Patch Showcase, Framerate Unlock Hack, Real Gameplay on PlayStation 4 Pro. So the video highlights that the following footage was captured using PlayStation 4 Pro hardware, and throughout this video you'll find a number of interesting tidbits discussing the process of creating this patch. So I'd like to begin by fast forwarding to 1 minute and 17 seconds where Lance talks about the process of doubling the frame rate, how that actually affected the game speed, and how he had to work around that by reverse engineering Dark Souls 3.
Like all other games sharing the same engine...
Now, right here, you can see the game running at 30 FPS with that stuttery look, and you can really tell the difference
Before it,
right
Bloodborne
here.
Does have a debug setting which allows the frame rate cap to be set to 60 FPS. But because all elements of game logic are set to iterate a fixed amount per loop, ignoring the actual measure of time passing between each frame, this simply causes every aspect of gameplay to run at double speed.
So when he made that transition, you can see how much smoother the game got, but of course the issue was the double speed. But Lance, as he'll talk about in a bit, found a way around that.
However, by studying the changes later introduced to the game engine by Dark Souls 3's PlayStation 4 Pro enhancement patch, and backporting a number of my discoveries to Bloodborne, I've been able to completely eliminate the 30 FPS cap from the game. Furthermore, by implementing some number of performance-focused optimizations that don't exist in Dark Souls 3 or Sekiro, Bloodborne is able to actually reach 60 FPS, drastically outperforming other games which use the same engine when running on PlayStation 4 Pro hardware.
So this guy basically took FromSoftware's engine, reverse engineered it, and then enhanced it so that it actually performs better than the stuff FromSoftware has released. Somebody should hire this guy. But that aside, I want to fast forward now to the 2 minute and 49 seconds mark where Lance talks about how most things do work at 60 FPS, but there are certain elements that did require manual patching to ensure all that runs properly. So here's what he had to say.
Without modification, all character, enemy, and environmental animations automatically work at this higher frame rate without issue. However, a vast array of features, such as cloth physics, particle and special effects, environmental wind, enemy patrol pathing, motion blur sampling rate, and elevator movement speed all require manual patching. This way, gameplay logic is correctly adjusted based on the amount of time that has passed between each frame, rather than being locked to a fixed time step. Thankfully, real-time cutscene cinematics have full support for arbitrary frame rates right out of the box, resulting in far smoother performance during playback.
So that's another thing that I wanted to highlight, the fact that the in-game cutscenes actually adapt very well to the enhanced frames per second. So Lance didn't have to do too much work to ensure that the cutscenes are running properly at 60 FPS instead of doubling speed or whatever other issues. And then let's skip to the 5 minute and 31 seconds mark, where Lance talks about boss battles and how boss battles in particular feel so much better, how it's just such a different experience to have that smooth frame rate, and he actually shows off some footage of boss battles in action.
However, it is in Bloodborne's boss encounters that the myriad improvements can be most obvious.
So I'm not gonna show all of the clips that he highlights in this video. The rest of this video is pretty much all clips of the game running at 60 FPS, but it really does look glorious. So this is one of the first bosses that you'll fight in the game, so I'm very familiar with this boss battle in particular and how that looks and feels. Just looking at this, it's so nice, just seeing how smooth everything is. I really hope Sony intends to update Bloodborne with this kind of frame rate, with this kind of performance. And last but not least, I'd like to fast forward to the 12:59 mark, where Lance talks a little bit about how he had to downgrade the resolution to 720p to ensure the most stable 60 FPS possible.
The elephant in the room is, of course, those aforementioned performance-focused optimizations, with the keen-eyed amongst us likely having already noticed that the game's rendering resolution has been dropped from a native 1080p down to 720p. The engine still upscales this to 1080p for the final video output, however this does affect both the in-game visuals and UI elements regardless. While I personally am quite happy to sacrifice video resolution in favor of a higher frame rate, this of course may be a preference which varies from person to person. It's hard to imagine whether PlayStation studios themselves might be willing to similarly patch Bloodborne to take advantage of the enhancement capabilities of the PlayStation 5, or if perhaps FromSoftware might someday recompile the game from source with native support for more powerful hardware. If done in such an official capacity, access to 60 FPS gameplay could become available to a wide-reaching audience.
So yeah, you get the idea. One can certainly hope that PlayStation and FromSoftware will work together to release a remastered version of Bloodborne that just the most important thing is performance. Even if the graphics stay exactly the same, just enhancing that frame rate would go a long way. That, I think, is the most important thing the game needs. And I think, personally, it's a matter of when, not if. I feel like Bloodborne Remastered is one of those things that would sell gangbusters. It would be a bad idea to not pursue that and to release the game to a wider audience at the best performance possible and to release it on PC as well. The main thing that really gets in the way is that performance. And to see that this is actually possible is certainly giving me hopes that Sony will look at the reaction, the positivity surrounding seeing Bloodborne running on 60 FPS, and realize that a lot of people would really like to see this release on PlayStation 5 and take advantage of all of the hardware capabilities offered by Next Gen. In the meantime, though, Lance does plan to release this patch at some point for those folks who are able to mod and hack their PlayStation 4s to enable this patch, which is not official, obviously. And he actually talks about that in the description of his video and in the comment section. So he put out the following statement: "So I made a patch for Bloodborne that modifies the game engine in such a way that the game can run at speeds up to 60 frames per second. And with a PlayStation 4 Pro with boost mode enabled, the game actually reaches that speed quite reliably." I hope you enjoy just a bit of a showcase video showing off how amazing I personally think the results are. Hopefully the future of Bloodborne's bright in the hands of PlayStation Studios and with the PlayStation 5 hardware, but if not, at least we have this in the meantime. Patch release and usage. I'll be releasing this patch publicly once the PlayStation 5 has released and Sony have made it clear whether or not Bloodborne will be enhanced on that system in any way. Out of respect for PlayStation, I want them to have the first chance to put 60 FPS Bloodborne into the hands of players. This comment will be edited, updated with a download link for the patching utility for Bloodborne version 1.09 in the future once this has happened. Obviously, you'll need a way to run unsigned code on a PlayStation console to use the utility once it's released. So basically, Lance wants to make sure that he isn't stepping on any toes, that he isn't trampling over endeavors that PlayStation and FromSoftware might be pursuing behind the scenes. Maybe they are working on a remaster or 60 FPS patch or something. It's just it hasn't been announced, and Lance doesn't want to overtake that, which is respectable of him. And this is impressive stuff. This guy who doesn't have access to, the source code of FromSoftware's game engine, this guy who's kind of hacking PlayStation and games like Bloodborne from the outside in, he's made quite a bit of progress. Even if he does release this patch, it's going to be accessible to such a minuscule percentage of the PlayStation 4 user base, which is why I hope that Sony, PlayStation, and FromSoftware makes this official and allows anyone who owns Bloodborne to gain access to some semblance of performance boost that will allow for 60 FPS gameplay on a game that would greatly benefit from this due to how heavily it emphasizes reaction and the correct timing with inputs and attacks and defense and the like. Now, some news outlets misinterpreted what Lance McDonald said here, so news outlet Kotaku published the following article with a tweet that reads, "Bloodborne modder will release 60 FPS hack if Sony fails to deliver," which makes this sound like a threat. It makes it sound like Lance McDonald is purposely pressuring Sony and threatening them to release this patch if they don't do it, that he'll do it himself if PlayStation and From aren't willing to, which is not the case at all, and Lance McDonald made it a point to emphasize this. So in a follow-up tweet, Lance McDonald said, "I never said this, and it's not true. The idea that the release of my patch hinges on Sony failing to deliver something is clearly not in line with reality. I'm waiting to make sure I don't get in the way of Sony doing important and awesome work, and regardless, I will release the patch whether or not they deliver." Once Lance's tweet went viral, Kotaku did eventually change their headline to be something more appropriate. It reads now, "Bloodborne modder plans to release 60 FPS hack, but is waiting to see if Sony will upgrade the game first." Unfortunately, the tweet that they posted with the less than ideal headline is still up, but don't misinterpret Lance's intention. He's just experimenting with the game and releasing this patch regardless of what Sony does, but he's also giving PlayStation and FromSoftware enough breathing room to ensure that they can announce whatever they may or may not announce regarding Bloodborne and a potential remaster, so he's just trying to be considerate. So yeah, with all said and done, some truly impressive work by Lance McDonald, and if one man can do it, a team of AAA developers certainly would be able to enhance Bloodborne to run at 60 FPS if they really wanted to. Again, for me, I think it's a question of when, not if, but nothing's official. I think it would just be a dumb move not to pursue this in some way, but it is up to them, and only time will tell how that pans out. But in the meantime, here is some footage of the game running at 60 FPS that's uploaded to Lance McDonald's channel. So subscribe to his YouTube channel and follow his Twitter account if you're curious about the work that he's doing with Bloodborne and other games that he might be intending to experiment on. And while we wait for a potential Bloodborne remastered or enhanced edition announcement, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on this Bloodborne hack and what your hopes are if a Bloodborne remastered or some kind of new Bloodborne port were to be released. Drop a comment, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.